against the Germans.
Sorry about that.
So anyway, so that's a little background. So there we go. Okay. So in 1915, a year after the war began, and again, we're not in the war yet, but sadly, an American passenger ship, the Lusitania, was sunk by German submarines, and 126 Americans were killed. And this is going to begin a slow process, and that's Wilson, by the way, Richard Wilson on the right. A slow process that's going to turn American public opinion more and more against the Germans. Because before the Lusitania, the country was really split about who to ally with. And of course, you had, beside that, you had isolationists, and you had those that were like Teddy Roosevelt, who's ready to fight now. So that split was going on as well, in addition to which side we were going to support. But this is going to really backfire on the Germans because of the support that is going to erode in America for their side. Okay. Okay. I'm going to I'll just press the next button.
Okay.
I'm just used to that.
Okay.
So I guess the enter button.
The arrows.
Okay. I just use the arrows. Okay. All right. I'll do that. Okay, so real quickly, one of the things that I came across by accident when I was researching this was this fellow here, Edgar Billany, New Orleans native, came from a very, very esteemed Creole family. Great story. I'm going to give you a real brief look at it, but he was a real Francophile, spoke fluent French, but a troubled kid. As a teenager, was sent to boarding schools, and he left. He got into trouble. He was always being harassed by the police. And at 16, he finds himself in San Francisco fighting issues there. He gets Shanghai, goes to China on a boat. Anyway, so when the war begins in 1914, he volunteers to fight with the French. This is before U.S. declaration of war. And he actually learned how to fly, became part of the famous Lafayette Escadrille. Have you ever heard of that? These were American volunteer pilots that flew with the French and the British against the Germans. We had that in World War II as well, actually, before the war started. He got shot down 4 times, was awarded, numerous medals of various kinds. Anyway, so the war is over. He's an amateur photographer. He would take pictures from the cockpit of the battlefields and such. So he goes to develop some of his films in Paris, post-war, and he meets this young French girl, and he takes a real shine to her. And 5 weeks later, I think it was 4 or 5 weeks later, they're married. And he wants her to come to the United States, so he brings her back home to New Orleans. They are in an apartment on Bourbon Street, on the 600 block of Bourbon Street, and near where his father and mother are. And he says, there's one thing I forgot to tell you. I'm already married. Yeah. So she says, "Oh, that's okay. I love you anyway. As long as you get a divorce, that's cool with me." Anyway, so they try to start various businesses. They're all unsuccessful. He starts drinking. He starts hanging out at the Tango Belt. Some of you may know the Tango Belt was an area in the kind of the Iberville, Bienville streets right near Canal. You got Canal Street, Iberville, and Bienville. Those were real rough areas. You think things are rough now? No, I don't know. I think it was much rougher then. And anyway, a lot of really sleazy things going on there. And he was hanging out, and he would come back, and he was starting to physically abuse his wife. She bought a pistol, kept it in the kitchen, and one day when he was hitting her, she took it out and killed him. Boom. Oh. And it was, and of course she was distraught because she loved him and had him cradle in her lap and so on and so forth. But she was defending herself. this made headlines all over the country. I was surprised to see. This is just one newspaper. I believe it's an Oregon newspaper. And it was big because he was the first American casualty of World War One. And so he was a prominent guy to begin with. And so anyhow, it's an interesting story. He's buried in Chalmette, the National Battlefield there. But she ends up actually his mother sympathized with her. And anyway, it's an interesting story that I happened to come across. But he was the New Orleans guy, the first casualty of American casualty of World War One. All right. So one of the things that happened during the war, one of the things that the war accelerated, because this was already going on, was the diaspora of African Americans that fled the South to go elsewhere for better jobs, basically. So what you had here was the Great Migrations, what we're talking about. The Great Migration began before the war, but the war was an accelerant to this migration, simply for a very simple reason. You got much better pay when you went to war industries outside the South. So cities like Chicago, and St. Louis, and Philadelphia, Pittsburgh had tremendous numbers of mostly African American men, but they brought their families as well, that fled the South, also to escape Jim Crow to a great extent, but mostly because of the pay increase because a lot of these people were agricultural workers that made a pittance. And so by leaving the South to go up to these industries, they were going to improve themselves. That was the thought. So I talk about this quite a bit. And then you can see the numbers here on the right, the difference in the number of folks, of African Americans, that increased between 1910 and 1920. So again, the war, this was one of the big impacts of the war on New Orleans. There was a shortage of workers in the war plants, and this was a ready source of workers. And so they actually, a lot of these industries sent agents down to the South, New Orleans included, to recruit African Americans primarily, and even pay their way, because a lot of these folks could not afford to pay for their family and for their children and wives and such on trains, and he would set them up in apartments in some of these larger cities. So that's one of the big factors that is important in World War One. And you can see the Jim Crow is another reason as well. They certainly wanted to escape this. This is an actual ad from the Times-Picayune, May 1918. And you can see how this was done. And, this is outrageous, would be outrageous today, but this was a commonplace kind of thing in the city. So this is an ad for a Mayor Israel clothing store. So just take a look at that. Imagine that. So this just, again, just to give you an idea of the kind of abuse that African American population had in this city. This was just considered to be just de rigueur. So a lot of the African Americans during those 2 years were drafted into the military, and they did have African American units that fought. Many of them ended up not in combat units, but as stevedores on loading and unloading trains and ships and such for military supplies for the troops. Also, in New Orleans, we had a good number of jazz musicians that participated in these unit orchestras. And so jazz was just beginning here in New Orleans, and this was something that was brand new to the French. And the French were wild about this jazz music. And after these formal concerts that would take place, a lot of the New Orleans jazz musicians would get together just ad hoc and start this little combo, and they would play after hours in these little French towns. And they just went nuts about this. So this is the first introduction that the French had to jazz music. Because during World War One, and several prominent New Orleans musicians actually were there. And this jazz, I'm going to read this to you because I think this is funny. I'm going to put my eyes on here. So this came, jazz was not wildly accepted in New Orleans. I'm going to read to you what several people have said. This is actually from both the Picayune and the New Orleans Item.
Did our batteries expire?
Oh, yeah, it's out.
Let me see if I got some.
That's all right. I think I can project. You can hear it, huh? You can still hear it? The red light is on. So
Okay.
it must be really weak.
Okay.
But let me just read this to you. This is funny. So this is how New Orleans, at least the newspaper, the conservative part of the city, so jazz. So jazz, and it was spelled JASS, is quote down in the basement, a servant's hall of rhythm. This is from the Picayune. The author could not understand how its cult of acolytes loved to fairly wallow in noise. The New Orleans Item was no kinder. Every musician must play out of tune.
Oh my.
They're seized by, quote, epileptic fits and perform like they're contortionists. Dancing to its rhythm sound was the most troubling of all. And the older folks, black and white, looked on it as a menace, symbol of unwanted change, a perversion of familiar, beloved tunes, which jazz musicians derisively labeled sweet music for dicty folks. The ICTY is what they call snobby white guys with money. They especially feared the enchantment that this dancing had for their children and its ability to overreach racial boundaries. Jazz was instant. This was a large part of its appeal. Its revolutionary message crossed Jim Crow parameters. Thank you. Fascinating young and urban whites to a musical species that evolved from the bowels of the African American experience. And it was participatory, not a passable lure. That was just unacceptable to some. Historian Jennifer Atkins defined the new dances that evolved from jazz even more broadly. She says women were, quote, testing the limits of social acceptability through their bodies as it brought couples together in sexually explicit arrangements. Even more alarming, the critics believe that these new primitive sounds encouraged racial mixing, a kind of musical miscegenation. So just a little bit about kind of reminds you what happened when Elvis Presley first recorded.
Yeah.
The issues he had with even a lot of stations refused to play his music because of this same kind of situation going on. Okay, let's move on here. All right. So one of the things that the Germans thought they could do was entice African Americans to their side, work them against the United States government because they knew that African Americans were treated poorly. And so maybe these people would be ripe for enlistment, or at least turning the leaf and siding with the Germans. So they would send these leaflets. This is a copy of a leaflet that they would drop on American lines where the African American soldiers were. And they, I'm not going to read this, but it says, you can't get a seat at a Pullman car in the South. How is lynching and the most horrible cruelties connected therewith a lawful proceeding in a democratic society? But everything is good in Germany. We love black people. Come on over to our side. There's no evidence that this kind of propaganda worked at all. None at all. In New Orleans, the African American community, the middle class African Americans, their headquarters, their the epicenter of the middle class elite African Americans was this place here, the Pythian Temple. The building is still there. It's on Loyola, right across the street from the library. I don't know if you knew that or not. But this is what it looks like now. That's what it used to look like. But they did a good job of keeping the facade the same. But they would have, businesses and barber shops, things like that. There was actually a dance floor on the top level that was really popular. But this is in the African American community, particularly the spokespeople, the elite, the educated African Americans in the city were very pro-war. And they did this intentionally because they thought that by making themselves appear to be very patriotic, not that they weren't, but this was there was a mission on their part to ally themselves with the war so that once the war was over, this would give them an uplift, they felt. They called it Negro uplift. And maybe by wearing the same uniforms as white soldiers and participating in the war and waving the American flag, this would give them more of a status with the people and the government. Of course, that's not going to work, as Jim Crow is going to continue afterwards. But that was the intent. And there was actually a couple of New Orleans, black New Orleans composers who wrote several real popular national songs. One of them was the Colored Soldier Boys of Uncle Sam, We're Coming. And it was played all over the country, and it was written by this guy named William Nickerson, who was a New Orleans-born composer. Words and music by him. So even though they were menaced, they were menaced by Jim Crow, they still showed their patriotism. Now, another thing that the war did, another accelerant, was the passage of the Prohibition Amendment. Now, this is a real head scratcher because Prohibition in Louisiana, at least in New Orleans and South Louisiana, was going to be a hard sell. But it passed the legislature, which was dominated by rural legislators. So the New Orleans delegation in South Louisiana had fewer people. So it was so that the state legislature, which was going to ratify this amendment, had to ratify the amendment. It passed. And this is actually from the 1918 Times-Picayune article. And you can see, I love this. So the ratification resolution was a signal for a great demonstration by the prohibitionists. These were the dries, the shouts of joy, noise over the dry victory continued. And then when it stopped, Mr. Evans said, "Now, Mr. Speaker, I move that the House take a recess in order to give the prohibitionists time in which to get tight and celebrate their victory." And of course, this brought another demonstration on. So, it was done sometimes. Well, let me read this to you. This will give you a better idea of why. So, patriotic gusto was never missing. New Orleans was as solidly behind the war as any other American city, but prohibition, however well it could be married to the war effort, was still a very tough sell in a city whose genetic code was unconditionally linked to adult beverages. It did not matter to most whether or not their beer was the Kaiser's brew, because what they did cleverly, the prohibitionists linked patriotism with prohibition, because they say, "Oh, beer, that's sure, the Kaiser's brew." So very, very clever of them. So again, they didn't care whether or not the beer was the Kaiser's brew or not, so long as it was cold. Dismembering the city's culture was unacceptable. From the mayor's Mardi Gras Day champagne toast to Rex, to the dinner and wine pairings at Antoine's, to the grungiest ballroom near the river's docks where crewmen gathered regularly for a beer and a smoke, public consumption of alcohol was an indigenous ritual whose origins reach back to the old world. It was as much a part of life in New Orleans as seafood on Fridays or cafe au lait and beignets after Sunday Mass. Taking this away was like discarding the bass player from a New Orleans jazz ensemble. Many average citizens felt that the entire country had been hijacked by a small but vociferous band of idealistic extremist renegades from the mainstream who were able to hoodwink elected officials into their grasp. Several of whom were privately against prohibition. Yet they voted for the amendment anyway, with little thought given to the impossibility of its importance. because the vote would appear to be unpatriotic. So that shows you how important that campaign was, linking it to the war. So let me show you a couple of things here. So the amendment passes. Of course, it went into effect in January 1920. These are some of the posters that were used very, very cleverly. You can see here our three big enemies: John Barleycorn, hard liquor, and then Austria and Germany. So they equated our enemies and alcohol. What alcohol does in the center here, look at this. So the bottle of alcohol, whatever it is, becomes an artillery piece. And then not in the peace treaty, still your enemy. So look at this. American doughboy being grabbed by this big arm, this fist around his ankle. And of course, you can read what it says on his forearm there, booze. And a few more. Look at that. How can you vote against these children? Vote dry for us. You can't. The saloon backer is a traitor to his country. So that's very plain, isn't it? And will you back me or back booze? Well, come on. The answer was pretty quick, pretty easy. So these are some of the reasons why the war really did, again, it was like an accelerator for the passage of the amendment. And then in addition to that, of course, the Women's Suffrage Amendment. So the 19th Amendment, as well as the 18th Amendment, are going to get an impetus from the war. And the reason for that is also pretty simple. The women took over the jobs, you know this, of a lot of the men and did various things. In New Orleans, it was interesting to me to find out that there was actually, that women started driving vehicles around, transporting officers from one spot to another, which was an unusual sight to see women driving these vehicles in 1917 and 18. They even had in the basement of the Rosebud Hotel, which was called the Grundwall back then, but same building. In the basement, there was actually a repair shop that would teach women how to repair cars. They would be under the chassis and changing oil and whatever, and it was taught by a female instructor. And again, this was outrageous to a lot of people. Totally different, but they became streetcar conductors. They were ushers in theaters. Oh my God, female ushers in the theater. They became clerks at different department stores in Canal Street, even selling men's clothing. So all of this was a real radical shift in our attitudes toward what women could do. But universally, they were applauded because they did such a good job at everything that they did. And this is going to certainly help them in their campaign for the right to vote. And just a few photos. This lady here in New Orleans was the point of the spear. She was the most important women's suffrage proponent in New Orleans. Her name was Kate Gordon. She and her sister Jean Gordon, a school named after her, Jean Gordon, for a while. But but particularly Kate, she was just an indefatigable workhorse when it came to women's suffrage, among other things. But her primary goal was to get the women's suffrage amendment, and they were called SUFs, incidentally. So she was very progressive in a lot of things. Homes for they call them feeble-minded folks in those days. She lobbied personally in Baton Rouge, in the legislature, to get Tulane to get the legislature behind the movement to get Tulane to open up medical school to women. And it was successful. So the first woman med student was really because of her efforts to do that. But I have it at the bottom here. She was an unapologetic racist. There's no doubt about it. Absolutely a racist. And so this is interesting. It's all complicated. she and a lot of other Southerners who were in favor of the women's suffrage amendment were against it. I'll take that back. In favor of women's suffrage, but were against the national amendment because guess what? A national amendment would allow Black females to vote as well. So what she wanted to do was get the state legislature to pass a women's suffrage amendment, and so that the legislature would be able to control who voted and who didn't. So she wanted white women to be given the vote, essentially. That's the bottom line. So in many ways, she's very admirable, but wow, she was quite a lady. Never married, very, very committed to certain programs. But you can see from that look on her face there, she's a determined woman. And this, some of the photos in Canal Street, tons of different fundraisers in Canal Street. There were parades all the time to raise money for bonds, to raise money for the war. Another really interesting thing was what happened in the city in insofar as Germanophobia is concerned. So if you were German or had German, some kind of German connection, you were not, it was not a pleasant time to be in New Orleans. Neither was it anywhere else in the country. But we had a significant number of Germans living in New Orleans. And I'm talking about both German born or even second generation. In fact, it was the second largest ethnic group, second only to the Italian population. About 22% of the ethnic population in New Orleans was German. So the Germans were all over. So crazy stuff happens when you're afraid. And that's what phobia is, right? So, things like this, the names were changed. I just have a couple of examples here. The Pickwick Club expelled. They had loyalty oaths all throughout the city, and if you didn't want to sign the loyalty oath, they would expel you. Tulane University, in fact, required that all of their faculty sign a loyalty oath to the United States government, and several of them refused just because of the principle of that, and they were fired. One of them in particular was a biology professor who was there for 24 years. I have his letter that he sent to the Tulane board. I found that in the Tulane records. And his wife was a Red Cross worker. He was a naturalized citizen. He was totally devoted to teaching at Tulane. Really persuasive letter asking for a time just to address the board and give a side of the story. So they said no. They voted unanimously not to allow him to speak, and just, no quarter. He was out. Very, very tough. So, and then you had syndicated columns in the Picayune by, his name was Bowen, and he called German aliens the scum of the melting pot, poisoning America, serpents in our bosom. And just really rough stuff that was taking place in the city. I know I talked to a lady who remembers our grandparents who spoke German. I went to the German American Society Club in Gretna and met her. Her grandparents who spoke German would only whisper during the war, and they were afraid to go out in the street and be heard speaking German because she told me that they burned their birth certificates because they were afraid of being targeted by folks. Take a look at this. This is the cover of Life magazine. Of Life magazine in 1915. Fascinating photograph, right? So you can see the kind of Germanophobia that existed in America at the time. Look at New Orleans. New Orleans is now New Hamburg. And my favorite is Chicago, Slaughterhouse. So everything was renamed German. It's a scary time.
More propaganda, of course, always the Hun, the German Hun, was depicted always as this demon with blood on his fingers, sometimes carrying an innocent woman away, just, considered to be really vicious and such. The rape of Belgium, a terrible atrocity in 1914 when the Germans invaded Belgium. You can see that's depicted here. German soldier dragging this young girl away, keep the Hun out, so on and so forth. And a couple of more, you get the idea. Movies came out of Hollywood. These are just two. One was called The Hell with the Kaiser. Not very ambiguous there at all, is it? The Kaiser, the Beast of Berlin, was playing at the Tudor Theater on Canal Street, and the Tudor Theater took it upon itself to erect a gallows on the sidewalk on Canal Street with the Kaiser being hung in effigy. Now, of course, this was to promote the movie, but it just shows you the mentality of us at the time. We were extremely, in a sense, we vilified the Germans to a great extent. So even you may remember the Katzenjammer Kids, which was a cartoon strip all over the country. The name was changed from the Katzenjammer Kids to the Shenanigan Kids. Again, it was too Germanic. So they changed the name of Hans and Fritz to Mike and Alex. It's crazy, right? You think, how could we have done something like this? But when you're at war and you're afraid, you do not crazy things. The Cobb's restaurant in St. Charles, Cobb's, a German restaurant in St. Charles Avenue, it's still there. That sign's still there. The owner, Conrad Cobb, who was a prominent New Orleanian at the time, he was accused of actually storing bombs in, it was totally false. He was a very, very pro-American person. And he had to come forward to kind of tamp down these rumors. And he said, when I took my oath of allegiance to us, I meant it and I still do. But some people still believe that he was disloyal. You may know this story too. We had a street in New Orleans, uptown, called Berlin Street. Of course, the letters missing, typical New Orleans street. Folks, we can't have that. We can't have a street named after the enemy capital. So there was pressure placed on the city council of New Orleans to change the name of Berlin Street. Anybody know? General Pershing Street. That's right. Still called General Pershing today after the American commander of the AEF in Europe, right? So it's still General Pershing. So the ironic, you know what I'm going to say? So the street, Berlin Street, along with Austerlitz and Marengo and those other streets that are near Napoleon, they're all one parallel of Napoleon Avenue. Napoleon was the big street. All of these streets, including this one, was named after French victories over the Germans to honor the defeat of Germany. And yet, it didn't matter. You can't have Berlin Street, so there's no logic. No, it's enemies, right? All right, crazy stuff. And I already told you about this, that the loyalty oath at Tulane and so on and so forth. And then it went further. Let's stop the teaching of German in our public schools. So this came from the Picayune. The state legislature is now going to outlaw it throughout the city. And look, this was the Picayune editorial cartoon. Look at that. November of 1917. And that explains it itself. All right. Another element that surprised me and would really pique my interest in this period. How are we doing for time? Okay. Was the American Protective League, the APL. The American Protective League was a government-sanctioned vigilante, sanctioned by the Justice Department during World War I. A lot of folks don't know about this.
They were all over the country. There were 2,100 agents here, right in New Orleans. And for $1, you could become a member. And all you had to do was fill out a simple, this is it. This is the actual application. Take a look at that. All you had was answer a few simple questions, and you could become a member. So what was the purpose of it? APL was supposed to ferret out any disloyal elements in society. And anyone that was suspected of being disloyal would be identified and brought in. And they weren't supposed to have arresting power, but a lot of them, a lot of them carried weapons. They were not supposed to be issued weapons. A lot of them carried their own, and they arrested basically carte blanche. They would, without any kind of or per court order, go into someone's home or business to search their records. And it was, crazy. So they would even look at people that didn't stand quickly enough, for example, at a theater during the national anthem. They would play the national anthem before the movie started. They would identify those folks that didn't stand quickly enough or didn't stand at all. And they would be brought in for questioning. It was a scary time. And this was sanctioned again by the Justice Department. And because they felt that the Bureau of Investigation, which is what the FBI was called back then, didn't have enough agents, and they were afraid that the United States was filled with all these German agents. But beyond that, anybody that had happened to be disloyal in their minds, it was nuts. I mean, there was a crazy stuff. I'm just thinking now. There was a Picayune reporter that went down St. Charles Avenue and counted the number of flags that were being flown from the homes of the people on St. Charles Avenue. And I think he said there were, just under 300 homes he counted in uptown area, but only 197 flags. This was a disgrace. And so, you better fly a flag or people would begin thinking that something was up with you. So it was a scary time for our country, no doubt. So you can't read this, but this is actually one of the reports that I found in Tulane by one of the APL agents. This one, I just summarize it here. Germany had given the world so much: literature, science, philosophy, the greatest race in the world. So somebody sent this to another person at this hotel, and another person overheard that person extol Germany. And he or she, I think it was a he, was brought in for questioning for simply saying what I have up there in quotes. Imagine that. And this is another one here. You can read this a little bit better. This is there was breakfast in the dining car of a passenger train, and this gentleman, J.A. Herman, refused to pay for his order because he was refused a second allowance of sugar. And because sugar was rationed, he said, I'm not going to pay for this. I want another spoonful of sugar for my coffee. And because of that, he was brought in because he was complaining about the rationing. So you see how crazy we were back then? It was nuts. This is what the agents carried, identification badges, and it gave them some privileges. Now, these people were generally older men. There weren't any women agents, older men that were too old for the military. And so they felt that they should, this would be their contribution to the war effort by joining the American Protective League. But look at the name of it, American Protective League. It's a euphemism, certainly, for what they actually did. Okay. So some of the things that they did here, you can see opening safes, going through desk drawers, and raids on homes and offices. It was not good, but it was all done in the name of patriotism. So that made everything good, right? So there it is there, the American Protective League badge. And they had their own newsletter, the Spyglass. So Mayor Martin Berman, ironically, was a German himself,
although in fact he was Jewish and he converted to Catholicism when he was a young boy. But 16 years mayor of New Orleans, the longest serving mayor in our history. So he was elected 4 different times. And he had the sign on his desk, "Don't park here." He didn't like to sit down and shoot the bull with many, but come on in, tell me what you need, and leave. Very effective mayor. Very, very effective mayor. Not enough of us remember his terms in office because he was really, really excellent and came from nothing. Came from nothing. Learned German himself in public schools in New Orleans. Um, One of the things that the troops were able to do during the war was enjoy themselves not far from where we're sitting now. Different amusement parks. There were 3 different amusement parks along the lake. One of them was Spanish Fort. The West End was another one, and then Milneburg. So they had a lot of jazz musicians that earned their chops at these locations. It's very well. Of course, hurricanes destroyed most of this. There was a hotel at West End. And then Canal Street, I told you earlier, would have all of these different parades to raise money. Here's a British tank coming down Canal Street. And then we had troops all over the city. This is, if you recognize it, these are the fairgrounds. This is a unit from Tulane that formed a unit, kind of the predecessor of ROTC, and they would drill at the fairgrounds. And then Storyville. So Storyville, we all know about Storyville. Storyville was closed during World War I because the War Department had it shut down. And the fear was, and this was not just here, but all over, but New Orleans had this unique uh, place where prostitution was legal. So interestingly enough, it wasn't really legal in Storyville. It was illegal everywhere else. So the way the ordinance was written, so there was a perimeter, and it was illegal to prostitution was illegal outside of those boundaries. So it didn't specifically say it's legal inside. But anyway, a lot of they were afraid, the government was afraid the troops uh, would enter these areas and VD and social diseases, and it would really reduce the readiness of the military. And so, for good reason, they wanted to shut it down. Berman, however, was vehemently against the shutting it down because it was an economic engine for the city because we had hundreds of people would come every month just because of Storyville, because Storyville was unique in that it was heterogeneous, racially heterogeneous. So there were mixed race women there as well, which was an attraction to a lot of people. It was at a location that was perfect because this is where, if you look at the top left where the Southern Railroad Terminal was, which doesn't exist anymore, that's Basin Street. And Basin Street was the Champs-Élysées of Storyville. What happened, the train would slow as it came to the railroad terminal, if you get my drift here. And then right across the street were these high-class brothels, because the best brothels were on Rampart. And as you got further away from the river, it became seedier and seedier. But the real upscale ones, really beautiful, well appointed places, were right on Basin Street. And so they would peddle these blue books. The blue books, some of you know, were these directories. You know about the blue books? There were directories of the brothels and the women in them. They would have photos of the women and a short paragraph on the services that they provide. And it was done in a kind of oblique way. And they would sell these for a quarter. So as people got off the train right there, they did peddle these blue books and then walk across the street, and there were the brothels. So it was really convenient for Storyville to have the railroad trains and right there. And there's another photo of it, of the Southern terminal. And they, of course, that's where the Sanger is now, huh? And another, we don't have many photos, but there are a few more. Most of those turned out. So again, racially heterogeneous. And it's interesting, that the way that the city ordinance was written, they call these women notoriously abandoned to lewdness. So that was the way, the way they were referred to. Interesting. And then we were the first city to erect a monument to give tribute to the soldiers that participated and died in World War One. And this is still can be found, although it's an obscure spot now, behind where Nichols High School, it used to be called Nichols High School, in the just one street beyond St. Claude. It's still there, and there are plaques, 4 plaques on the pillars there, and those plaques indicate the participants, New Orleans participants in World War One. So anyway, that concludes a very quick. If you're interested, I have copies of the book here. If you want to learn more about it, I hope you enjoy my talk. I hope I didn't go over. I didn't. Thank you. If you have questions, you can ask me. I'll be happy to try to answer any question that you might have. Questions? Must have done a really good job. I guess
You talk about how did this, can you give a little bit of what happened after the war in terms of some of these movements and all you talked about?
Yeah. Well, the APL, the American Tech League, disbanded. Although I can tell you that they were supposed to, all the agents were supposed to turn in those badges, which gave them kind of, I could get free straight streetcar rides. They got better seats at the French Opera House. They kept, a lot of them kept these badges because it gave them kind of a status. But officially it was dissipated. So that's one thing. I don't know what else. I can tell you that sadly, one of the sad parts of it is that the African American soldiers who came back faced a ton of lynching all over the South. Many of them were lynched in their World War One uniforms. So they were thinking, okay, this is going to provide some protection. I participated in the war, and it backfired. In fact, in many cases.
They called it the Red Summer.
Yes, the Red Summer. Yeah, that didn't happen here so much in Louisiana, but yeah, I mean, it was all over the South. Not just the South, but I can tell you that. It was not just the South. You can look at maps now. You can find maps that show you where the lynchings occurred throughout the country, and it was all over the country. It wasn't just the South. Yes, ma'am.
Did the Germans intend to torpedo the Lufthansa?
Yeah, that's a good question. We know now that the Lusitania was carrying contraband. And so it was targeted because of that, and it happened to be a passenger ship. But it was against our policy to provide, because we were officially neutral, although we were not. If you look at the numbers, we traded a lot more with England and France after 1914 than we did with Germany. So we were supplying the British and the French with material aid, even though it was illegal for us because of our neutrality. So yeah, it kind of mitigates somewhat the horror of that talk. But nobody knew about it at the time, so it doesn't matter. Because everybody thought this was a vicious attack against this menace, Germany.
But the Germans must have suspected there was contraband on it.
The German high command did, no question. Yeah. Good question. Yes.
What was sort of the relationship between the Sicilians and the Germans? Unlike World War II, where Italy was clearly on the other side.
I don't know. So his question was the relationship between Sicilians and Germans. I've never read anything about that, whether it was, the Sicilian population really was unique in that they were mostly living in what was called Little Palermo, which was the French Quarter. So I don't know how much interaction there was between, and a lot of them worked on the river with produce, particularly. The German population was probably a little bit economically seated well, whereas the Sicilian population was not. I mean, the freshwater was a slum
Yeah.
back in those days. It was a cheap place to live. And these folks didn't have much money. The Germans were much more well established. So I don't know the answer to your question. I mean, that's all. I don't think it was adversarial in any way. Any other questions? Thank you so much for your attention. I appreciate it. Keep on learning.
So Brian, thank you so much for talking to us today. As a memento of your speech, we plan to give every speaker a umbrella because it's a very important tool to have in New Orleans. Our learning before lunch logo.
Oh, thanks so much.
Thank you.
I appreciate it.
And if anyone would like to purchase one, they are up here at front. Also, we will have a business meeting in December. And along with that, next month, we will be accepting nominations for our board and we'll be voting on that. We have a board member who unfortunately has to resign, so there is an opening if anyone would be interested in serving. We'll be talking about that a little bit next month so we can start getting nominations. So thank you for your time. Have a great rest of the week. Thank you.
Thank you, Laura. Okay.
So we had a fur bar down market. Okay. No. No.